I'm back. Mr. Clarke's back. Time to take a look at 1803, one of the more difficult periods of time in world history, in which we reflect back on, so we try to not repeat the mistakes of the past. And we'll be looking at the Holocaust. Some of the key objectives we'll look at as we move forward in 1803 is we'll be identifying the roots of the Nazi persecution of Jews. We'll describe how the Nazis carried out a program of genocide. We'll describe the various acts of Jewish resistance. And we'll summarize the response of the Allies to the Holocaust. So the first thing a lot of people think about is where are the roots of these anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish feelings in Germany and even around the world. And as we go through these questions, kind of think about even the responses before I take you through them. So kind of think about where these roots come from. This is not a uniquely German feeling, this anti-Semitic prejudice feeling towards Jews. It's something that had sort of been there underneath the surface throughout Europe for centuries, not only Europe, but even reflect back to ancient Egypt, which had enslaved Jews thousands of years ago. We do see a lot of history of prejudice towards Jews. 2, how did Adolf Hitler exploit German anti-Semitism for his own political gain? So again, kind of think for a moment. When you think about the end of World War I, there was a lot of discontent and unhappiness amongst German citizens. Adolf Hitler's rising to power in the aftermath of World War I. There's tremendous anger and resentment towards the Versailles Peace Treaty, which had deeply punished the German population. Hitler began to scapegoat German Jews by blaming them for a lot of issues that were ongoing in Germany, using anti-Semitism and prejudice towards Jews as a uniting force within the German population. 3, how did the 1935 Nuremberg laws impact Nazi policy? So these are anti-Jewish laws. They basically stripped Jews of all citizenship rights, banned them from marrying non-Jews, and holding many high-level positions within Germany. I have an additional one in there. Also had the requirement where the Star of David on their outer clothing. This identified them then as being a Jew. 4, how did the Hitler Youth reinforce anti-Semitic policies? See some imagery here. The Hitler Youth movement taught children that Jews were polluting German society and culture. And when you think about wanting to get a feeling of anti-Semitism, kind of, I guess, instill that in the culture and within society, the younger you are and that you can start this program, the more long-lasting those ideas would be. So Hitler tried to create a sense of pride amongst the youth within German society. You can see they had Hitler Youth uniforms, and they had a lot of pride, unfortunately, for this movement, and their respect for Hitler was unquestioned. Similar to what we had seen in some of these other countries that had totalitarian dictators like Joseph Stalin, who created a cult of personality and established himself as a godlike figure. Hitler, too, was the big father. He took over their upbringing, education, and leisure time. By takeover, it means, symbolically speaking, you always had Hitler on your mind. He warned parents any interference or failure to cooperate could result in the imprisonment or having their children sent to other Nazi homes to be reared and trained to be a loyal Nazi. 5, had the Nazis use the concentration camp system throughout World War II. Obviously, a concentration camp is a place where Jews and others who were thought to be less desirable in Germany were sent. So the Nazis originally used a concentration camp as a place to detain political prisoners, people who were deemed less worthy. Prisoners were used for slave labor purposes. And as time progressed, Hitler used the concentration camp system as a place to send people the Nazis considered to be undesirable. So in addition to Jews, this included Slavic people, homosexuals, gypsies, and the handicapped. Gypsies included people who lived kind of like on the outskirts of cities. They didn't necessarily have a full-time job. They used makeshift tents or structures to kind of live in, so they didn't necessarily have a permanent existence or kind of a nomadic group. Who did Adolf Hitler put in charge of the Nazi concentration camp system? A name you should be familiar with, pretty infamous in history. Heinrich Himmler, pictured below. The best political weapon, according to Himmler, is the weapon of terror. Cruelty commands respect. Men may hate us, but we don't ask for their love, only for their fear. And with that came loyalty and obedience. Those are some of the key things that Himmler emphasized. 7, how did the Nazis put their anti-Semitic beliefs into practice? They forced many Jews to become slave laborers, and eventually the concentration camps would shift or morph into death camps or extermination camps. Speaking of extermination, it takes us to a broad term that applied to the Nazi Holocaust here during this period of time leading up to and during World War II. What is a genocide? This is a systematic and deliberate murder of a particular group. The differentiation between a genocide and a massacre is indiscriminate. They just kill whomever. A genocide is a targeted killing of a particular group. 9, what was Hitler's final solution? By 1941, German leaders had devised a plan to systematically eliminate all Jews and other groups by killing them in concentration camps in what was called the final solution to the Jewish problem. And of course, it's Heinrich Himmler, who we looked at previously, who's in charge of this plan. Ten, do you think the guilt of Hitler and the few who devised the final solution lessens the guilt of many people who carried out those orders? So obviously, if Hitler's in charge of this, as well as you have Himmler and some of these other high command, and then they give out the orders to the subordinate people, the people who are lower ranking members of the Nazi society, the Nazi military, and carried out these orders in the genocide, does that absolve them of guilt? I mean, can they not be blamed, or should they also be blamed? So that's kind of an interesting kind of question there. So of course, the Nazi leadership, including Hitler, they bear the majority of the blame, while others would argue that ordinary people made the Holocaust possible by following the orders of their leaders. Hitler was such a motivating speaker, very intimidating to the masses, that it was difficult, I'm assuming, in the eyes of many Germans to not follow his orders. One thing to think about there is if the average person in Germany did not follow Hitler's orders, they never would have been able to carry out the Holocaust. So you partially blame Hitler, but you think of your own self. If you're part of the military, part of something here in the United States government, they start ordering you to kill random innocent people. Would you comply or not? Eleven, how are the death camps different from concentration camps? Which of Hitler's goals did the death camps address? Concentration camps were initially used, as we mentioned previously, detention centers, imprisonment camps, labor camps. The death camps were put into place for the sole purpose of executing millions of undesirables immediately upon arrival. Death camps became a key component of Hitler's final solution. Some camps were dual or split camps. Split camps, we mean they had areas that were a work camp, and then on the far side of the grounds would be the death camp or the death chambers. Well, what were some of the procedures that would be carried out at the camps? Trains, they arrived at the camps. The prisoners were told to hand over possessions, line up by age and gender. They were told that they were going to receive their possessions back at a later date. They always want to try and prevent panic at the camps. They were told they would need to shower to prevent the spread of lice, disease, and other issues. The young, the old, and the sick, they were immediately targeted for killing and sent to the shower rooms, which were in reality the gas chambers. Those who were more strong and skilled may be sent to a separate work area or work camp where they would usually be worked to death. They were deemed as exposable or expendable. And because they were expendable, that means that these quote unquote disposable human beings, they were worked to the point of death, so be it. Move on to the next more able-bodied person who came to the camp. Another unfortunate aspect of this period of time, Dr. Mengele. He was a German doctor and scientist who did disturbing medical experiments on some of the Jews and others who were sent to the camps. Such things as putting humans through extreme conditions, putting somebody underwater and seeing how long before they would drown. They often use twins for experimental purposes. They want to see if they can detach and reattach limbs and things like that from one twin to another. And they did a lot of horrendous things in terms of basically human guinea pigs that are being used to be experimented on in scientific labs. 13, how many people were killed in the death camps? The exact number, somewhere between 11 and 12 million. For our purposes, you can just say 12 million because I'm sure the numbers are underreported opposed to over. 6 million Jews and around 6 million other humans were killed in the death camps. 14, why was it difficult for non-Jewish civilians to help, hide, or protect Jewish neighbors? Nazis had spies to locate people who were in hiding. Anyone who helped to aid a Jewish person would be taken to a concentration camp as well. So if you did help somebody out, let's say you're a non-Jew, then obviously you are risking your own life by doing so. Others who didn't help out may have had anti-Semitic beliefs themselves, or although they may not have been in full support, or at least open to the idea of what was going on. 15, how were Warsaw ghetto residents an inspiration to others? Of course, Warsaw is in Poland. A lot of the camps and a lot of the anti-Semitic and final solution activities actually take place in Poland. They stood up against persecution. They tried to revolt. They inspired others to persevere and to believe that the war and the horrors of the Holocaust would come to an end. 16, where were many of the death camps located? We mentioned many of them were located in Poland. Some of the more famous and infamous, I would suppose, camps here, the ones who killed the most people. Auschwitz was the worst camp. By worst, we mean they killed the most and most efficiently and most quickly. Other camps included Sobibor, Treblinka. The very first concentration camp is Dachau, which was actually opened in the Bavarian region of Germany in 1933. You can see the Dachau camp in the imagery down below. So the two that I would kind of emphasize here that you should be familiar with, you should know that Dachau was the first. Auschwitz was the worst. Oh, I clarify that for you here. All right, so we look here at the imagery of the camp. You can see they have the barracks there. That's where you would live. They have a couple separate areas here. They usually had 2 sets of razor barbed wire. That way, if you got through the first, the guard tower would see you before you could get through the second. And what really made Auschwitz the worst camp that we alluded to a moment ago This is the front gate of Auschwitz. It's the crematorium where they would burn the bodies in some cases to try and make it less to get rid of. Here's just a pile of bodies. It was 12,000 a day. That's 500 per hour. 1.6 million in all. So it was like an efficient, unfortunate killing camp. 1,800 private non-Jewish citizens helped the Jews. Many risked arrest to hide Jews in their homes, saving thousands of lives. Anne Frank, one of the more famous cases, was able to hide out in Amsterdam throughout the war, avoiding extermination. If you ever do visit Amsterdam, you can see the Anne Frank house there, museum. 19, why did the Allies take only limited action to protect the Jewish people in occupied Europe? The Allies were hoping they would stop the German advance sooner than they actually ended up doing, and thought the problem would be addressed in that way as kind of a broader war strategy. Initially, the Allies were dealing with economic depressions in their own nations, were focusing on their own problems. That's why they didn't get involved in the 1930s when this began. Others also exhibited feelings of anti-Semitism and weren't necessarily as sympathetic to the Jews as they probably should, as well as the fear of communism. Some feared communism even more so than fascism in Italy or Nazism in Germany. 20, after liberation, why was life difficult for European Jews who survived the Holocaust? Survivors of the Holocaust didn't have a home to go back to. Many didn't have family left. If they did, it was partial family. What they once owned was stolen or destroyed. European Jews basically had to start over with nothing. Many of them then did move in the aftermath of World War II in the 1940s to Israel, which was created as a homeland for Jews. And finally, one of the more important questions here that you should think about even before I go through it, what lessons should we learn from the Holocaust? Unfortunately, some of these lessons have not been learned well enough. Nations and citizens need to react more quickly to crimes against humanity. That's where a lesson was not learned. The United Nations and nations must be proactive. Probably a message from this period of time is about evil itself. Evil triumphs when good people do nothing. And that's pretty much what happened in Germany. We had mentioned that idea as to who should be blamed, Hitler and the leadership of the Nazi Party, or everyday German citizens. Well, every single citizen in Germany was not a bad person back then, but yet many of these so-called good people did nothing in terms of stopping the Holocaust. And lastly, even with the lessons of the Holocaust, the Rwandan Genocide took place in the 1990s, and we've also had a wide variety of different issues, ethnic cleansing in the Balkan region. We've had the killing fields in Cambodia. We've had the Darfur region of the Sudan. So we've had a lot of different areas and places that have experienced mass killings, even in the aftermath of the lessons we should have learned here from the Holocaust. Hopefully you enjoyed learning about some of these horrible things in history. You found this somewhat impactful. Hopefully you've taken some lessons away from this discussion as well. And until next time, Mr. Clarke is out.